Let's begin the session today. So, we had started with our Spring Boot REST application project yesterday, where we were trying to build an employee management system, and we had like created one REST API yesterday. So, hope everyone is able to follow that. If you have any questions, you can just ask it now, or we will move forward with creating some more REST APIs. Did anyone try out creating the REST API yesterday? Okay, so we'll move ahead with okay. So TJ, how was it? Are you understanding or not? Means that is my main concern. If you try it out, it will be quite. I think it should be good because Spring Boot is like quite easy in comparison to like core Java. You will have to write less code, and there are like lot of annotations here. So those will like make your life a bit easier. It is easier to develop with Spring Boot. Yeah, sure, TJ. Yeah, great. Good job. Yeah. Okay. We were able to create an employee record in the organization. This was the example that we saw, and we were able to register an employee uh, in the organization. So we were able to validate it through the database. Yesterday we had seen this. Okay, so we were able to check the employee table. So from this employee table, we were able to like validate that we had inserted few records. Like we had created uh, this two records. So we'll try to like fetch it through the API today. Means yesterday we were able to create two records, uh, create two employees in the organization, and we had entered few details like ID, name, and age. But we validated it through the database that we were successfully able to uh, create the records. Today, what we'll do, we'll try to create a REST API and try to fetch it with the help of the REST API. We'll create another API for fetching the employees. Let's say we have a requirement where we want to fetch all employees of the organization. Okay, let's say fetch all employees from the organization. So, this is a fetch information. Uh, that means we want to fetch something, get something from the database. So this would be a get mapping, right? Like for creating a resource, we need post mapping. For fetching anything, we would require a get mapping. So let's try to create one REST API. We would use get mapping for this, and let's try to give a path. So our URL would look something like this. Our REST API URL would look something like this: slash fetch slash employees. So this would basically this API would basically return you all the employees which have been like registered, fetch all employees from the organization. So let's create our method. Let's create our controller method. So it would be public response entity, and since we want like all the employees from the organization, so one employee can be represented by one employee DT object, right? So if we return one employee object. That means we can get the details of one employee. Agreed? Means if we have like one employee, this one employee object basically returns the details of one employee. So if we want to like fetch the information for all the employees, what should we do? Our return type should be a list of employees. Agreed? Anyone has any questions? So we would pass the return type here as well in the response entity. So yesterday we had just passed this response entity, and we had just we were we wanted to show the status code as created. Now we want to return some data as well, because this is a fetch employee fetch information from the database. So we need to pass some return type. So the return type we would pass in this angular braces. And since we want the details of all the employees, we would need a list of employees. You had studied about this list of objects, right, in collection framework in core Java. So try recalling that. So we would need a list of employees, and we would give our controller method name as get all employees. And since this is like get all employees, we don't require any parameter. We know that we want to fetch all the employees from the organization. So let's try to create a list of employees. And we would call the service layer from our controller layer. This is what we did yesterday. So we need to call our service layer, and let's try to create one method in the service layer. We will create one method like get all employees. Okay. And once we get all the employees, I know I have not created this get all employees method. That is why you're getting this error in that's why you're seeing this error. We'll try it, we'll go ahead and create this method. So once we get these employees, what we would do, we would return this response. And in the response, what I want to return, I want to return the list of employees. And if the list of employees is returned fine, what we want to do, we want to return a status code of 200. 200 means okay. 200 is basically okay. That means the response is received fine. So let me try to create a response entity. And in this response entity, last time we had just displayed the status. Now we want to send some response as well along with the status, like we want to get the list of employees. So we would pass the employees list of employees here, and we would pass http status code as okay. So see, what I've done until now is I have defined a controller method that is a get mapping method, because it's used for fetching the information from the database. And if I want to like fetch all the employees, our employee DTO object that represents the record of one employee. If I want to retrieve all the employees, it would be a list of employees, right? Got it? And I've created I have to create one service method from which I'll be getting all the employees, which will be returning me all the employees. So for now, think that those methods will be created. And once I get those employees, I need to return the response. And in the response, what I need to return? I need to return the list of employees and a status code of 200, that is okay. So anyone has any issues or concerns here, or you're fine with this? Okay, so in that case I'll move forward. So see, I have not created this get all employees in the employee service interface as of now. So this is what we did yesterday, right? From our controller layer, we will call the service layer, and the service layer will call the data layer, and from the data layer, in the data layer, we will write queries where we communicate with the database. So we will follow the same pattern today as well. So see, when I hover over this get all employees, I'm getting an error that it cannot resolve method get all employees in employee service. Create method get all employees in employee service. So if I click on this, it will automatically generate a method in the employee service interface. So let me try to click on this. See, once I click on this list of employee, this is the return type, means this method will basically return me a list of employees, and this would be the name of the method in the service layer, that is get all employees. Okay, now what I need to do is, since this interface method is created in this employee service, there is a implementation class also for this interface, right? We had created one employee service IMPL as well. That class is implementing this interface. How can we add 200 success message to the response? We will TJ, let me complete this API. Since we had see this HTTP status dot OK, right? This represents a status code of 200. So if you return in this response entity, right? Return new response entity. This can see, we can like pass a single parameter where we just want to like show the status, and if we want to like send some response and the status, we can do something like this. We can pass two parameters. The first parameter would be basically the list of objects that you want to return, and the second parameter would be the status code that you want to return. When I hit the API from the postman, right, then you will be able to see both the things, like the employee response as well and the status code as 200 as well. So let me try to did you understand, TJ? Okay, yeah, sure. So we will go to this service interface, that is the employee service, where I have defined this method. Now our interface is being implemented by one of the classes, and this class is employee service IMPL. So let me go to this class, and once I go to this class, see, all the methods which are defined in the interface must be implemented by this implementation class. This is our implementation class, employee service IMPL. See, this class is implementing employee service, but we have not provided the implementation for this method in the implementation class. So that's why we are getting some error. And once we are getting this error, we need to implement this method. So let's try to go ahead and implement this method. So you can see this, you can go ahead and click on implement methods. So let me try to go ahead and click on this implement methods. See, it's giving me that option that you can create this method get all employees. So we will click on OK. So once I click on this OK, this method is generated for us, means the structure of the method is generated for us. Now whatever logic that we want to write, whatever code that we want to write in this method, we can go ahead and write. So this is our service implementation class. From here what I need to do is I need to communicate with the data layer. Everybody agreeing with me? From here I need to communicate with the data layer. So that is why what I need to do is I need to call the employee DAW object, employee DAW class reference. In this class I need to define a method that will basically help me to get the list of employees. So let me try to create a list of employees, and I need to call my employee dot fetch. Let me try to create one method like fetch all employees. Let it be fetch all employees, and yeah, that's it. And once I get all the employees, what I will do is I will return this employees. If anyone has any questions until now, you can ask. So I have created the structure of this method. Now in the DAW layer or the data access layer, what we'll do, we need to create this method. So let me try to create this method. Create method fetch all employees in employee DAW. See, for now this method does not exist in the data layer. So that is why I'm getting an error like cannot resolve method fetch all employees in employee DAW. If I click on this create method, it will go ahead and create that method in the employee DAW interface. See, this method is created for now. See, everything is like related, means all the APIs that you will create will be similar now. Means the you understand the calling pattern. What happens? The client calls the controller layer. From the controller layer, you are calling the service layer. From the service layer, you are calling the data layer. And in the data layer, you are writing the logic to communicate with the database. That is, you are updating the database, inserting new records, fetching something from the database. And if you want to like make some edits, you can make some edits in the database. Now, every time what we'll do, we will define our method controller layer method. After that, we will create one interface, one method declaration in this service interface. And as soon as I create any abstract method in the interface, the class that is implementing that method has to provide the definition, right? That is what the class and interface contract is, right? If a class implements any interface, then it has to basically provide implementation for all the abstract methods that are declared in the interface, right? That is the contract of class and interface. We have studied this in core Java. So this employee service IMPL class implements employee service. That is why whatever methods were declared here, those have to be implemented in this class. So we have provided the implementation here. Now in this method like get all employees, I will need to write some logic to get the employees from the data layer. So that is why I am calling this data layer employee dot fetch all employees. And we had like auto-wired this employee yesterday, right? We had done a constructor level dependency injection. So we should be able to fetch any, we should be able to call any method that is defined in this employee DAO. And employee dot fetch all employees. If I click on this, if you do a control and click on this, you will go to the interface. That is the interface in the DAW layer. So here you have provided one method declaration, and this employee DAW interface is being implemented by this employee DAO IMPL. So here what you will need to do, here you will have to provide the implementation. So see, as of now, we just have the implementation of one method that we created yesterday, like for saving the employee details. Now you want to basically go ahead and try to create another method for fetching the employees. So we'll go ahead and try to click on this. See, it's giving me that option as well. Class employee DAO IMPL must either be declared abstract or implement abstract method fetch all employees in employee DAO. So we'll go ahead and implement this method. Let me try to click on this implement methods. See, these are ways where you can like minimize your effort in writing a little code. The editor provides you a lot of benefits. If I click on this, it will generate the structure of that method for me with all the return types, and the basic structure will be provided to me. And then I need to write the logic in that method. So let me try to click on this. So see, this method is generated for me. Public list of employee, fetch all employees. So what this means is I need to basically uh, write the query for fetching the employees from the database here. So I need, what our agenda is, I need to call, I need to create a query that fetches all the employees from the database, from the employee table. We had the employee data saved in the employee table, right? So I'll write a query which helps me to fetch all the employees from the database. So it would be like string query, and we had uh, fields like ID, name, and age in the employee table. So we would write select ID, comma, name, comma, age from employee table. So this would be our query. Now this query is, this is the query that we used to see. This is the query. If you pass in your this MySQL workbench, you can try to execute it. You'll get the result, like you are able to fetch all the values. Alternatively, you could have done this as well, like select star from employee. But while writing any real-time project, it is a good practice that you mention the fields, like whatever you are trying to fetch. Let's say you don't want to like fetch all the fields, right? So in that case, your response, suppose you just want to like fetch the ID and name. So in that case, you don't want to like mention this age. And from your query as well, like it is more readable that whatever fields you want to fetch, anyone who reads your code can understand that you want to basically fetch the employee ID, employee name, and employee age from the employee table. So this is it. We have written our query. Now what we want to do, we want to basically query using our JDBC template. So yesterday also what we did, once we had written our query in this save employee details, what we did, we used the help of this JDBC template. So JDBC template would basically help us to now query the database. So this JDBC template will communicate with the database. So I need to pass some parameters in the JDBC template. And what would be the return type of this? So we would have a return type of a list because we want a list of employees. So let's see, this would be a list of employees and it would be something like this. And we need to call our, we need to uh, use this JDBC template from querying our database. So yesterday we had to save something in the database. So for all the save or update queries like insert query or update queries, we would use JDBC template dot update. But this is a fetch query. So JDBC template has provided one method, that is JDBC template dot query. So for like using, if you want to like fetch any kind of information, right, you would use this method JDBC template dot query. And see, it requires two parameters. In the first option that you have, right, we need to pass the string SQL parameter, and then we need to pass this row mapper. So, and on the right hand side, right, you see this list of t, means list of objects it will return you. On the right hand side, it is basically the return value. So this is a, the return type is list of objects. So in our case, it would be list of employees. Now see the two parameters that we want to pass here. We need to pass the SQL query and we need to pass this row mapper. But we have not created this row mapper as of now, right? Okay, we need to create one row mapper. So for now, just click on this and we need to create our row mapper. So let's say I have passed the SQL here, the query here, and I need to create some row mapper. Let's name this row mapper as new employee mapper. But I have not created this row mapper as of now. I'm expecting some error here. See, I'm getting that error, right? I am getting that error because I've not created this employee row mapper. This query method of this JDBC template, this requires two parameters. One is the string query. So we have created this query and it requires a row mapper. So we will see what this row mapper is. We will need to create a row mapper. So understand this, like when we query something from the database, right? Let's say we have queried from this database. Our database, let's say, has it returns me 10 rows. It returns me 10 records for now. Let's suppose this query returns me 10 records. So in that case, what happens? There's a row mapper that I need to create such that each time, for example, when the first record is fetched, if I go to the SQL workbench, for the first time when the first record is uh, received, that record has to be mapped with an employee object, right? So in Java, we have an employee object and this will fetch all the information from the database now, right? Because we have three fields in the database, that is ID, name and age. But once we run this query, we need to like map the details that are fetched from the database into some Java object. So for that purpose, we need to create some kind of mapper, and that mapper will help us to set the record in that Java object. So let me try to like create that mapper and then it will be like more clear. So we'll create a separate package. We'll create a separate package, and that package we will name like mapper. So we will create our mapper here. Let me try to go ahead and create this employee mapper. We will name this class as employee mapper. And in the implementation of that here, right, you were able to see that it requires some row mapper. So this employee mapper that we are creating, there's an interface in Java that is already built. That interface named is called as row mapper. So we will need to implement this row mapper. So see, there are like two implementations. One is javax.swing.tree and one is org.springframework.jdbc.core. So we will need to select the second one because we are using Spring Framework now and we are using it for connecting this JDBC. So let me try to click on this. And also one more thing, you had seen this, right? It needs a T type. T is basically representing an object here. So once I click here, I will need to pass some kind of object here. So once we receive the data from the database, what kind of record we are expecting? That's an employee record. So that employee record has to be saved in a Java employee object. Got it? So we will pass this employee class reference here. And now see, this editor will give you some error. What error it is giving? So this row mapper has one method. This row mapper is basically an interface. And see, this row mapper is basically an interface. If I click on this, if I click on this row mapper, it will take me to the documentation of this interface. So see, there's a method like mapRow which takes two parameters, like one is the result set and one is the integer value. This integer value is basically the row number. So let's say it has basically our query has returned 10 records and this is the row number. So this result set basically contains all the records now, and this row number is basically the number of records here. And for each record, let's say we are pointing to the first record now. So first record of the database is getting mapped to this Java object, this employee object. So the first record of the employee record from the database is getting mapped to the employee Java object. And again we will see whether this result set is still containing any more records. Now it will start pointing to the second record in the database, and again that second record will be mapped to the Java object. And once all the records are mapped from the database to the Java objects, we, we now have a list of these records. So in our this DAO MPL, we will be able to get a list of employees. So this employee mapper will help us to map the objects. So let's see how we will utilize this map row method. So you have seen this map row method, right? This is in this interface. So if we are implementing this interface, we definitely have to provide the definition to this. So what we'll do, we'll click on this and we'll click on this implement methods. So once we click on this implement method, see, it is the same map row that we will have to create in this particular uh, class. So let's try to implement this. See, it provided me with a basic structure of the method like public employee map row, result set and integer I. And it throws an SQL exception because this is basically interacting with your database. Means this method mapRow is basically used for mapping the records from the database to your Java objects. So what we'll do, we'll create an employee object, employee equal to new employee, And what we'll do in this employee, we will set the data whatever we are getting from the database. So employee dot set id, set id, and this result set basically contains the uh, this result set basically contains our data. So id is there in the database, right? And id is of numeric type. So what we will do, result set dot get int is basically representing that we want something from the database that is of integer type, and we will have to pass the field whatever is the name in the database. So let's say the field name is id, so we want to pass the field name here like id. So see what this result set is doing. This result set has the record from the database, and the id is basically of integer type. That is why we will do result set dot get int, and we will pass the column label. Column label is basically whatever name that we have provided to that field in that database, that is our column label. We will need to pass this as it is without any casing errors or without any uppercase lowercase errors, and it has to be as it is. Like if it is like employee id, we need to pass employee id. If it is just id, we will need to pass just id. So see, there are like three fields, so we will map all these three fields in our mapper, employee mapper. So let's go ahead and see this. We have mapped one of those, like we have mapped the id. Now we will map the name, employee name. So employee dot set name, and see, this is of string type, name is of string type. So from result set, what I need to do is result set dot get string, and in the string I need to again pass the label, and that label is basically the field name from the database. This is name. So let me try to write down here as name. And the third thing is we need to set the age. So employee dot set age, result set dot get integer, because this is age is of integer value, and we will again pass the label name. Label name is age. So let's try to pass this age, and finally once we are done, we are returning this employee object. So see, this mapping is done like 10 times. Let's say our, if there were like 10 records, this mapping is done 10 times. And once all the mapping is done, then this JDBC template helps to like query. It collects all those 10 records, and it will provide it as a form of list, and that will be a list of employees. So let's go ahead and try to import this. Now employee mapper com dot myorg dot mapper. Okay, so we have imported that class here, and finally we are returning all the employees. I think this should be good for this API. Anyone has any confusion who did not understand any step? Because if you write any further mapper methods, we will do similar kind of things. Anyone who did not understand any step, let me know. Okay, we will go ahead and try to run this application. Okay, our application is started, and now we will try to go to the postman, and we will create a get method API. We will use our get me method API to call this API. So we would use http colon localhost, and from our base path, from the controller base path, let me go to the controller. The base path is API slash v1, right? This API slash v1 should be coming first. API slash v1, and then for all the APIs that we define, the base path would be API slash v1 because we have defined it at the class level. This is the base path, and after this we would go ahead and append this URL to that API. So let me try to go ahead and append this, and now let me try to hit this API. Okay, we got some error. Okay, what is this? Okay, sorry, I did not provide the port. Our application was running on 9090. So I think we should be good now. HTTP IP, our server is running on local. Our server is running on local. That is why we have provided the IP as localhost, and our application is running on this port 9090. This we had specified in the application.properties file, right? So we would specify the port here. This is our base path, and this is the URL of the that API, the fetch employees. Let me try to hit uh, this API now. So see, we are able to guess the result. We are able to get two records, right? Our employee object, sorry, our employee table has two records as of now in the database, right? So this is the response that we have received in the form of Java object. See, this is JSON, this is a JSON structure response, and this is one record, this is one record, like one Java object, and this is another Java object, and it is provided to you in the form of a JSON. So we are able to fetch the employee records of the employees from the database, and see, here is the status code like 200. Okay, you are getting the status code as well, like 200. Okay, is a proper response, like we are able to successfully fetch the records from the database. So this is the fetch employees API. We are able to successfully fetch all the employees from our database. Now we'll try to create some more records. Let's say we had two records yesterday, right? This was the register employee API that we created yesterday. Now we'll try to create some more records. Let's say this ID is 3, and we have something like name as Mitchell, and let's say the age is 26. So let me try to go ahead and hit this API. See, 201, we are getting a status code of 201, and this is like saying me that we are able to create this. So now we are able to create this record. Let's try to use our fetch employees. We should be expecting like 3 records now, right? Let me try to click on this. See, we are able to get 3 records. Isn't it interesting? Now you are able to get everything with the help of APIs. You don't have to go to the database to validate if your queries were run, if your, but sometimes to debug the purposes in real time, you will have to do a lot of things. But let me try to hit this query as well. You will see 3 records here. See, you have 3 records. The last record was of Mitchell, right? The ID is 3, name is Mitchell, age is 26. Let me try to go ahead and try to create one more record. So we have a new record with the ID 4, name is Mars and age is 22. Let me try to hit this send. So the new record is created. Let me try to fetch it from here. From this API, we are able to get the fourth record as well. So we are able to fetch all the records. And similarly, if you try to like validate it from the database, you can go ahead and try to run this query. So you have four records now. So everyone understood this. If you have any issues, you can let me know. Anyone has any queries? Okay. Is there any way we can modularize in resource the base URI? And can we created return message for created endpoint? Uh, or is there any way we can modularize in resource the base URI? Do you want to like change the base URI? I did not understand like modularize the base URI. What are you trying to like say? Means you can go ahead and try to like change this base URL if you want, or let's say you want to like create another controller and you want to like provide another base path, that is also fine. You can go ahead and create click on this controller, and you can create a separate controller, provide a different base path for that altogether, and that base path can be you can create different APIs and provide different path in at the method level. See, it is we are using the base path for that purpose only, TJ. We want to keep the base path as common for all the APIs. That is our agenda, and that is why we have provided it at the class level. If you don't want this base path to be same, what you can do, you can just remove this request mapping from this. You can go ahead and try to just remove it from here. So whatever API whatever URLs, now it will be like, now if you want to hit from Postman, you will have to remove this API slash v1. You will have to remove this API slash v1, but it is not a good practice to remove that, because each controller layer should have some base path, and that is like common. This is a standard way of hitting your REST endpoints. Like after this IP endpoint, you need to have some kind of like base path, like API slash v1, that shows the versioning of the REST API as well. And after that, it is your method endpoint. It is the endpoint of your particular method. So that's why we have provided this base path here. So this base path is common, that is why we don't have to like write it again and again. So if you want like alternatively, what you can do is remove the request mapping here, and in this API itself, whatever exact path you want to have, you can provide that. But that is not a good practice. You always should have the base path. And see, when you get some requirement, this is like related to the employee. This is like related to the employee, that we are creating all these things. Now if you want to have some things related to, like let's say department, so you can have a department controller, and here you can like write the APIs in a department controller. So you can like always go ahead and try to like segregate your code based upon your requirement. Got it, TJ? Yeah, okay. So one more thing, when we write any API, right, we will have to provide some kind of logs as well. So let's try to put some logs. Logs are like important in your application that will help you to basically debug your application. Means if something goes wrong, then you will have to see the logs and analyze like what exactly went wrong. So let me try to write some logs. For that purpose, Spring Boot has some utility like logger utility. This logger utility basically helps in like uh, this logger utility helps in writing logs. Logs are basically some statements which help you to track if you want to like see whether our API did enter this method or not. So you can write some kind of logs. So see here there are like lot of logger implementations like java.util.logging and java.org.slf4g. So we would and there are like lot of other implementations as well like Apache logging and Sun Media and all. But we would take this org.slf4j logger. So let's take this logger, let's name it as logger, and there's a factory method available in slf4j that will help us to write our logs, logger factory, and again we will take it from the org.slf4j logger factory. See, as soon as you take this, these imports are getting added. These two imports were added right now, and this from this you can know that your logger and logger factory classes are basically coming from this org.slf4j. So logger factory dot get logger and employee service impl dot class. So we need to pass the class name in which we are trying to write the logs. So we are as of now we are in this employee service impl class. So you will have to pass this employee service impl class name dot class, and just let's go ahead and try to write some logs. So once we are in this method, okay, just a minute. So let me try to expand this code, employee service impl. Let's try to write some logs here. So when I do this logger dot right, so it gives me a lot of logs here. Like you can see this error logs, you can see this debug, right? You can use this info as well. So there are like lot of logs that you want to you can see. So in production generally you will not write a lot of debug logs because sometimes means you can write logs once it is like very important. If you write a lot of logs, right, sometimes it slows down your application. But important logs are always written, means you should write the important logs at least. So let me try to write down something here for demonstrating how these logs will be printed. So as of now, I am writing this logger.info, and let's say when do you want to use this logger.error. So let's say you are getting some exception. Let's say you are getting some exception. So in that case, you can use that logger.error in your exception. So for now, I'm using some logger here, and this is a info level, like this is giving me some information. So what I will write is registering a new employee, and similarly I'll write some logs in this get method as well, like fetching all employees. Write some meaningful logs that you are able to get, like from which method you are able to get these logs. So let me try to rerun this application. Okay, let me try to write some logs in the employee DAO MPL as well. So let me try to write some logs here as well. So logger, this will come from org.slf4j. Logger is equal to logger factory. This logger factory will also come from org.slf4j dot get logger, and here we would pass the name of this particular class, employee DAO IMPL dot class. Let me try to write some. Let's say I'm writing some logs here, logger.info, and see, this basically we can like rows inserted. So when you write an insert query, right, it basically returns you an integer type. So you can like validate that as well, like how many rows were inserted, number of rows inserted, number of records inserted. So in this case, you can pass something like this, and here you have to pass the rows inserted. See, when you want to like print some value, right, you can like give this as at the end, this curly braces, number of records inserted, and similarly you can just write some logs here as well, like number of records fetched, number of records fetched. So here what you want to do, you have a list of employees, right, and you already know how you can get the size of that particular list. In collection framework you have read this method, right, employees dot size. So this basically gives you the size of that particular list. So return employees. So now let me try to run this application. So our application is started. Let me try to create a new record again. So let me try to put an ID of 5, and let me try to name this as Sally, and let's say the age is 24. For now I will clear out all the logs so that you're able to see the logs here. Let me try to hit this. So a new record is created. Let's see some logs here. So see, you can see these logs, right, registering a new employee. These logs we have written just now, right? So registering a new employee, and see here, number of records inserted is 1. You can give some, you can give something like this, number of records inserted, like colon and first colon. So it would come with that colon. So that is fine. Now let me try to hit the get API. Let me try to hit the get API. So see, we have got 5 records. And now what we'll do is see, number of records fetched is 5. And we are also able to see these logs like fetching all employees and number of records fetched. So this is uh, this is what logs can help you. Sometimes you want to like verify if this particular API that you hit, if it was able to reach this method or not. If what response is it returning? So you can like get all the things here. Now if you want to like say, if you want to print out the employee objects here, let's say logger dot info employee record, and let's say employees. Let me try to rerun this. So see, you can see the employee record as well. Now that I am printing this list here itself, right? In this logger info, you are able to see this employee record as well. You're able to see all the records like employee with ID 1, name John, age 25, employee with ID 2, name Andrew, age 28. You can see all these things in the logs as well, right? So you can try to print this as well. But try printing only the relevant logs such that it does not like clutter your code, and it also does not slow down your application. So try printing the relevant logs itself. So this was our second API that we had created. We'll create more APIs now. So if you have any questions related to what we did today, you can ask me now, or I'll proceed with the next API. Take a minute, try to like reflect on what we have done until now, and if you want to ask any questions, you can go ahead and ask those questions. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, I'll proceed forward. So now what we what we are able to achieve until now, we are able to create an employee record in the organization, and we are able to fetch all the employees from the organization. Now what I want to do is let me try to go ahead and fetch one particular employee. Means this API was like returning me all the employees, right? Now I want to fetch one particular employee itself, and let's say I know the ID of that person. I want I know the ID of that person, and what I want to do is I want to fetch information related to that person with the ID. So let's say fetch employee details, fetch particular employee detail, particular employee detail by ID. So let me try to go ahead and create this API. So this would be again a get mapping because we are trying to fetch something, right? So this would be a get mapping, and since we want to basically fetch a single employee record, right? So what we would do, we would have our API something like this. So our API would look something like this. We would modify this one. Let's name it as fetch employee. And what we want to do, since we want to like fetch our employees, a single employee this time with the help of ID, we would use some kind of request parameter. So I had told you about the request param when we were studying the Spring Boot theory classes, that the request params.
I think it's
Hello. Yeah, okay. So
okay.
we can pass the request params.
Pro-
Yes, anyone has any questions?
Uh, Before start this one, next. Uh, Next session when you start this is better.
What do you want to say?
I mean, I'm trying to the next session. This one when we stop is the next session.
Uh,
Start as a new one.
you want me to start this in a next session?
Yeah, that's my thing.
Means we still have like lot of time left, right? I want to like cover at least a few APIs. Otherwise, this would go on for a very long time.
Okay.
Yeah, we still have like lot of time left in this class. Try to like be attentive for some time, and we'll cover two more APIs and then we'll wrap up the classes today. Means those will be like simple APIs only. Now that you have understood like two APIs, right? It would be very easy for you to like understand the next APIs as well. So see, this is a fetch employee detail, right? So now we want to fetch a single employee detail. So what I would do is API slash v1 slash fetch employee, and I want to fetch the details with the help of ID. So what I will do is I will pass as a parameter. And if you recall the Spring Boot session when we talked about the request param, we pass the params in form of key value pairs. So ID is equal to, if I want to pass something like this, let's say I want to pass the ID as 1. So this would be our API. We need to develop this kind of API. See, this is fetch employee, and we want to fetch the employee with the help of ID, and this is the ID. This is our key, and this is the value of the ID. Means any employee who has an ID of 1 needs to be retrieved. This is ID. So this we want to basically fetch this particular record. Yeah, this is query param TJ, correct. Yeah, we want to fetch the first record with the help of ID. So if you see this is our ID. We want to fetch this particular employee's record. We are passing a query param. This is our query parameter. So query parameters are basically, see, this is question mark, and that is why this is called query parameter. And ID is equal to 1. ID is basically the key, value is basically 1. So let's try to go ahead and implement this one. So in our code, what we would need is we would create another API, and let's name this as, we would name this as slash fetch slash employee, and what we would do is we would write our method. The rest part, that query params or the request parameters, right, we would pass it from here. We would see how we can like retrieve those query parameters from the part. When you hit that API with the query parameters, how you fetch that in your controller method, that we will see. Let's try to focus on that. See, this time our response would be a single employee record, right? Last time what was our response was, our response was a list of employees because we wanted all the employee records from the organization. Now this time we want just a single employee record. So in the response entity, what I would do is I would pass an employee object because we are expecting just a single employee record. Now what we would do, write a method like get employee by ID, and let's, now we want to fetch that query parameter as well right here. So what we would do, there's an annotation like request param, and in this request param we want to pass the value. the value of the parameter. So the value of the parameter is id. So this is the parameter. So we want to pass it as it is without any spelling mistake. So we would pass the id here, and this request parameter has to be assigned to some variable. That is, this id will hold that particular value from the request parameter. Whenever you fetch this request parameter, right, and provide something like integer id, so this id's value 1 will be assigned to this particular variable. Now we will create this controller method. We will write down the logic for this. So let's say, and the return type of this method will be a single employee. So we would return it as a single employee. Employee is equal to, let's say, we will again have to call our employee service. We will again have to call our employee service. So employee service dot get employee, and we will create some method as get employee, and we will have to pass the id. So we will again have to return this response once this employee object is retrieved from our uh, records. So the response entity would be something like this: return new response entity. So try to relate now. In the last example, we were trying to fetch all the employees. So that is why we had returned a list of employees. So this was a list of employees, and the code was http.statuscode.ok. Now here what we'll do is we'll try to return a single employee, and the status code would be okay. But we have not created this method as of now in the service layer. So we will have to create this method in the service layer. So we'll click on this, create method get employee in employee service. So this method is created in this employee service, and once this method is created in this employee service interface, the class implementing this interface, that is the employee service IMPL, has to provide the implementation for this. So we will go ahead and try to create this method. So let's click on this implement methods. It will generate this particular method here. So see this code here, it has generated this basic structure of your method. So let's try to write down some code here. Let's try to also fetching employee by id. We will write some loggers here, fetching employee by id, and this would be our employee object as a return type. So we will have to now call our data layer like employee dot fetch employee by id, and we need to pass our id here, and let's write down another logger statement here, logger.info employee record fetched, and we would print out that employee object, fetch employee by id, and finally what we'll do is we will return this employee object. But we have not created this fetch employee by id method in the data layer. So we will try to go ahead and create this method. So see, this method is now created in the data layer interface. And once this method is created in the data layer interface, what we'll have to do, we'll have to provide the implementation of this method in the in the class that is implementing this interface. So you're getting an error in this employee MPL. Try to go ahead and try to implement these methods. Click on this. So once you click on this, it will generate one, it will generate the basic structure of your method. Now we'll write some code here to interact with the database. We'll write some code to interact with the database. So as usual, what we'll do is we will write the query here. So our query would look something like this, like select ID, name, age from employee table where, and we need to provide some condition now that in the previous query we were getting all the records. Now we want to fetch the particular record. So in this case, our condition would be that it should match the given employee ID. So it would be something like where ID is equal to, and we don't want, let's say we have like passed the value here where id is equal to 1, but this is kind of like hard coding the employee id, right? This is kind of hard coding the employee id, which we don't want to do. So in this case what we would do, we would pass a placeholder like the placeholder that we passed yesterday for inserting. Similarly we will pass a placeholder for retrieving the records as well. So after we are done with this, what we would do is we would return the employee object. So employee is equal to jdbc template dot. Now there's a different query method. See, for fetching anything, we will have to use query methods. But query method generally will have many return types. If you see the return type on the right hand side, if this is a T, that means it is a single object. If this is a list of T, that means this is a list of objects. But here this time we just want a single object, right? So what we'll do is we will use something like query for object, and in this query of object we will pass the parameters. So what parameters I need to pass here? So I can pass the query, that is the first parameter, and then I will make utilization of the same employee mapper, because this is also an employee record, right? So we are trying to fetch the employee record from the database. So this employee mapper will again kind of like map our records fetched from the database to the Java objects. But this time it will be a single object, single Java object. And we need to also pass the parameter that we are trying to fetch the query. So we are trying to fetch it with the help of this ID. And once we are done with this, let's try to return this employee. Let's try to return this employee. So let's try to rerun this application and let's try to see the output. So let me try to hit this API now. Okay, we got some error here, like API v1 slash fetch slash employee id is equal to 1. Okay, what is the error? Fetch employee Okay, okay, I see there's a typo here. It would be small caps. My bad. So return versus return new. Uh, so we are able to get this response. TJ, what's your question? I did not get. Return versus return new. Which file are you talking about? I did not get your question. TJ, you there? What is the advantage of new keyword other than instance? So new keyword is basically used for like creating your objects itself. So that is the most important thing. Means it will always be used for creating the instance or objects. So that's the use of a new keyword. Whenever you see, right, something associated with new keyword, you would see that the object of that is created. When you see this new employee mapper, an instance of this employee mapper is created. Yeah. So here in this example, we are able to fetch the details of that single employee record. So any questions in this? DJ, is it fine that I continue for like 10-15 minutes? 10 minutes means I'll cover one more API. Yeah, okay. So now we have seen APIs that helped us to create an employee record in the organization, and we were able to fetch all the employees from the organization, and we were able to fetch a particular employee details using ID as well. And we had seen the use of query param as well. And we had seen the usage of this request param as well. Now what we'll try to do is we'll try to remove an employee from the organization. We'll try to remove an employee record from the organization. And for that, what we need to do is we need to basically delete that record from the organization. So let's say I have to use a delete mapping REST API this time because we want to remove a person from the organization. So let me write down some documentation here, and this documentation would be basically remove particular employee from the organization. So this would be a delete mapping, and we would use some path like this. Let's name this path as slash remove slash employee, and we will pass a path variable this time. That means the placeholder would be ID. So after this, right, after this path, we would, let me try to show how the URL would look like. The URL would be this time a delete URL, and it would be like remove, and after remove we would have to pass employee, and this ID, right, that we are passing here, this ID, we will have to pass some value. in the URL you are seeing this ID, that's a placeholder. So for this placeholder we need to pass any value. Let's say I am passing a value of 5. So from our API responses until now, I want this record to be removed. I want this particular record to be removed with ID 5. So this is a delete API, and in this delete API you will have to pass the ID like this. After remove employee, this is the ID that we are passing. So this is the API contract that we have to develop. So let's go ahead and try to write down this API. So public response entity. So we don't want to actually return anything. We just want to return the record. We just want to return the status if that employee was removed. So let's name this method as remove employee, and we would have to use. So how do you get this in your code? So last time we had seen that for getting the query param we had used request param, right? So for getting the query param we had passed a annotation like request param, and we were fetching it with the help of the key. So in the query param we were passing this key. So this id, when it is passed, this integer id was basically holding the value. Now here what we would do, since this is a path variable, we would have to use another annotation, that is path variable, and in the value again this is like id. So I will have to use value is equal to id. So see, we are trying to utilize all the knowledge of whatever we studied, like these annotations we had studied in the Spring Boot theory classes, right? So we are seeing the practical applications of those annotations. These annotations like make our life a lot easier. So now our basic contract is created, and what we'll try to do is we'll try to call our employee service, and in the employee service we will create a method remove employee, and here what we need to pass is we need to pass this id. And once this id is passed, what we need to do, if the employee is removed from the organization, perfectly fine, we need to return a status code of OK, like, and we would just return a status code of OK. But for now we have not created this method in the service layer. So let's try to go ahead and try to create this method in the service layer. See, now this method is created in the service layer, and once this method is created in this employee service interface, our employee service IMPL class has to implement this method. So we will go ahead and try to click on implement methods. So this is the remove employee. This is the remove employee method in the service IMPL. So let's write down some loggers here. Removing employee with ID, and let's pass the ID here. I'm trying to just write down some logs here, and once we are done writing this, we will call our data layer. So employee dot remove employee, and we would pass the ID here, and once we are done we will go to the. So see, this method does not return anything, so the return type is void, similar to like registering the employee. We just registered the employee. I did not want to return anything, so the return type was void. And in these examples, like the fetch employees, we had tried to return a list of employees, so the return type was list of employees. And in this get employee method, where we wanted to return a single employee, the return type was an employee object. So let's try to create this method in the DAW layer. So this method prototype is now created in the data layer. Now this once this is created in the data layer, we'll have to go to the implementation and we'll have to basically provide the implementation of this method. So let's see this. We go ahead and try to click on this implement methods, and this has provided me with the basic structure. Now for removing this employee from the organization, we will have to write a query, and that query would look something like this: string query, sorry, my bad. So I'll have to write down the SQL query. So let me try to write down the query. String query would be, when you want to write any delete query, it would be similar to this, like delete from, this is the query that we use for deleting any record from the database. Delete from table name. So our table name is employee. Delete from employee where id is equal to, again we have an option of like hard coding, but we are not used to hard coding anything in the query. What we'll used to do, we will use this placeholder, and this placeholder would be this question mark. And after we are done with this, what we'll do, we will again use our JDBC template, and for updating anything in the database, or for inserting anything in the database, or for removing anything from the database, we use this update query, and this JDBC template.update method will help in removing this employee. So let's go ahead and try to pass this query here, and we also need to pass the ID. So once we are done with this, this basically also tells us like how many records are deleted. So if you go ahead on this update, right, this returns a integer value, and the integer value is basically rows deleted. So we can write down some loggers just to verify how many rows were deleted. Logger.info, let's write down some logs, number of rows deleted. So I think we should be good with this implementation. Let me try to rerun this application, and we'll see if we are able to successfully remove an employee from the organization. So our application has started, and let me see. As of now, we have 5 employees in the organization, and what we are trying to do is we are trying to remove this employee from the organization. Let me try to hit this. So we have got a response of 200 status OK. That is, the employee has been removed with employee ID 5. Let's try to verify the logs. Let's try to verify the logs. So see, as of now, when we were trying to delete, where these logs were printed, removing employee with ID 5 and number of rows deleted is 1. That means that one record was deleted. And if you now go ahead and try to hit this API, we don't expect to see this record. So let's try to hit this API. See, that record has gone from our database, and that is why only 4 records are fetched. So these were the things I wanted to cover in today's session. So we were able to build a few APIs today, and we were able to build actually 3 APIs. That was like one API for fetching all the employees details, another API was for fetching a single employee detail, and then another API was for removing the employee from the organization. So these were the things that we had seen for today. So let's keep it until here itself. We'll try to cover the next things in the next class. If you have any questions, you can let me know, or we will wrap this call here. And do you have any questions? Okay. In the next class, we'll try to create some more REST APIs, and we will also try to see some more validations as well in the uh, methods that we are creating. So for now, in the REST APIs, right, we have created, we have not used any validation. Means suppose the client passes any input from the postman, so in that case we would want to put some kind of validation, like if that data is valid or not. We would want to perform some validation, and then try to see different kind of bad request. Like there were several other status codes as well, right? Like if the client is sending some kind of bad request from the request, so what proper response would be submitted. And also we'll see in case of what exceptions we can throw from our uh, project. Like if an API is not functioning well, what exceptions you will throw, how you will handle those exceptions, those things also we'll see. And we'll also try to see, means we'll try to see different kind of profiling mechanisms as well. Like this is for now, we are using it on our local, but let's say you want to deploy this application on some prod, or if you want to uh, if you want some different kind of environments where you want to utilize this application. So for each of the environments, what you can do is you can create a different property file. And how you use profiling means how you point to the same how you point to different environments from the same application. We'll see all those things as well. And once this is done, we'll try to see if we can cover JUnits as well. But I think JUnits would be mostly in the next to next class. Next class we will also cover some more APIs, and then try to cover those profiling things, and try to cover the exception handling things. So these are few things we will be covering in the next class. Yeah, sure. Thanks, TJ. Yeah. Okay. That's it for today. We'll wrap this call for today. Yeah. Thank you.